In the previous video we created this element which displays a flag and a country name. In this video we're going to build upon this element and to make it much more dynamic so that we can display multiple flags using the same element. So the first thing I'm going to do is to make our element slightly better looking. And we'll do that first by deleting this select statement so that we just have our flag within a container. To make our element stand out, it's going to need some sort of header, and so we can actually reuse the toolbar element which we used in the actual page itself. And so if I simply paste that across, we're going to be able to see this element actually within our custom element. So if I refresh the page, our element now has its own custom header. Although as you can see, this has indented our actual element because of the way that we've added padding to our main container. To address this, we can simply move our container below the actual toolbar itself. And if we refresh the page, we can see that this is giving us a much better result. Now we're actually going to use this header to display the abbreviation for the specific country, and we're also going to want to display the country name below the flag. So it will end up looking something like AE in the actual toolbar. And then inside of the container, we'll also want something like the United Arab Emirates, which will look something like this. Now we obviously don't want this to be 100% of the width, and so we can do something about that as well. If we use host, we can change the way that our element is displayed so that it's displayed as an inline element. And we'll use inline block. And as you can see, that's automatically resized it for us. If we went onto the index page and created multiple instances of this, we would see that each element is displayed as we would hope to see it, and not spanning the entire width of the page. So now that our element is in a much more workable state, we can go ahead and actually look at how to go about data binding. So there are three pieces of data that we want to actually consider binding here. We have the initials, the path to the actual flag, and the name of the actual country. So to do this, after we've actually specified what our element is, we can also specify properties. Which is an object. And then here we specify the name of each element that we want to use. So we're going to have the country name, we're going to have the country ID, and we're going to have the country flag. Now we want each of these elements to actually be displayed when we're creating our element. So when we're actually creating the stretch flag here, we want to be able to type country name. And we want that data to pass across to our actual country name element. So to create that link, it's simply a matter of specifying the actual type of data that we want to pass across. So in this case, we want type to be string. And we also have the ability to specify a value, which will be the value which is passed across if we actually don't include the property in the opening tag. So for now we're just going to use United Arab Emirates as our actual default tag. And we can then access that from within our actual template scope itself, which we'll do in a moment. Before we do that, however, I'm just going to flesh out the rest of this section. So as you can see, I've just basically created these elements in the same way as we created the country name. And we've also just copied across the actual values from within the actual template itself. Now we obviously want to link this data into our template itself so that we can actually access the data from our template, which will mean that we don't have to worry about the low-level implementation details anymore. And to do that, it's simply a matter of replacing the contents, which is statically typed at the moment, with the equivalent of variables. So to do that, all we need to do is open two curly braces and then type the name of the elements that we want to show. So in this instance, we want to show the country name. And including that within two curly braces, Polymer will actually go ahead and pass that information across for us. So this double curly braces with the actual element's name inside of it is now the equivalent of having something like echo and then the variable name, if you were thinking about it in terms of JavaScript. We obviously want to do the same here for the country flag. As well as up here for the country's initials. So let's go ahead and remove this element temporarily to see how it looks. If we refresh our page, we're going to see all of the default information passed across. This is the information that we've set as our default values, and we can of course go ahead and overwrite this. So for example, we can specify that the country name is going to be USA. The information doesn't necessarily need to match up at this point. We're just demonstrating the connections. But refreshing this page will show that USA is now displayed instead of United Arab Emirates. And we can do the same thing for country flag. Although it's important to remember that we're actually using the entire path here. And we can do the same thing with the country's ID. So if we refresh the page again, we see that we get the USA flag, the US as the country ID, and USA as the country name. Now you may be thinking, why would you even need to bother with all of this information and data binding in general? Well, to answer that, we can just look at this tag. All that we need to provide is the name, the path to the flag, and the country's ID to be able to display all of that element. We don't need to worry about things like duplicating all of the code necessary to actually display this, because the template itself is only one file. Now this is obviously a very short file, but you can imagine cases where you have much more complexity. And duplicating all of that code for every single one of these pages that we want to display isn't going to be as efficient as just duplicating the code from a template. So for example, we can just duplicate this as many times as we want. And Polymer will worry about all of the positioning and everything else for us. We don't need to even concern ourselves with that at this point, because we're just reusing code that's already been created. And because we're using Polymer, which has obviously been designed to be used in a responsive manner, if we open up the developer console, we can see that all of the elements are responsive by default. We don't need to worry about things like making the elements responsive. They inherit that behavior from Polymer itself. It also allows us to consider binding this information directly to things like JSON files, which will allow us to display a lot of information directly from an output from a database, for example, which is something that we're going to look at in the next video. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that.